It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon at Windsor, the kind where the royal guard stood tall, silent and stoic, their faces unreadable, their duty simple: protect and observe, but never react. But that day, something shattered the silence. Behind the rose garden walls, voices carried, not just any voices, but those of Queen Camilla and a senior aide. What the guard heard wasn't gossip or idle talk. It was about Princess Charlotte, and the tone was unlike anything he'd ever heard before. Within days, whispers turned into headlines, and soon, one loyal guard found himself at the center of a storm that could change everything inside the palace. If you're fascinated by the unseen moments behind royal gates, the whispers, the choices, and the truths that rarely reach the public, then stay right here. Hit like to support more deep royal stories, subscribe for the next chapter of this unfolding truth, and share this with someone who still believes the palace walls never talk, because sometimes they do. The day began like any other, calm, ceremonial, and carefully choreographed under Windsor's golden autumn sun. The leaves danced lightly across the cobblestone paths, brushing against the polished black boots of the royal guards who stood motionless at their posts. Among them was Sergeant Michael Rowe, a quiet, disciplined man who had served the crown for 12 years. He knew every echo of the palace walls, the way sound traveled across the courtyard, the hushed rhythm of the Queen's heels on stone, even the laughter of Princess Charlotte when she chased butterflies near the garden. To him, it was all routine, until that day. Somewhere beyond the hedge-lined path, voices began to rise, soft at first, a murmur, then clearer, sharper. Michael's posture didn't change, but his senses sharpened. His duty forbade him from listening. But it's hard not to hear when the words carry with such intensity. It was Queen Camilla, and she didn't sound like herself. Her tone wasn't the calm, public smile people saw during royal appearances. It was raw, tired, frustrated. "She's too adored. Far too adored," Camilla said, her voice trembling between pride and something deeper, envy, perhaps. "Everywhere she goes, they compare her to Diana, and now Charlotte. She's becoming her image all over again." Michael's heart caught in his throat. Princess Charlotte? What could the young child possibly have to do with this? The aide's voice followed, careful but curious. "Your Majesty, she's still only a child." Camilla's reply came fast, like something she'd been holding for years. "Yes, a child who already has their eyes on her. The media, the people. She's becoming the next people's princess. I've seen it before, and it nearly destroyed us." The air grew heavy. Michael looked straight ahead, motionless, but every word dug deep into him. He knew the history, the ghost that lingered over every royal step. Diana. But this felt different. It wasn't about the past. It was about fear of the future. He wanted to step away, to block out the sound, to let the moment pass. But the garden's acoustics trapped the conversation like an echo chamber. Then came the line that changed everything. Camilla whispered, almost inaudibly, "If Charlotte keeps drawing that kind of attention, someone will have to make sure she's guided tightly before it's too late." Michael froze. The words were vague, but the meaning felt loaded, protective, or possessive. He couldn't tell. He tried to dismiss it, to file it away as royal stress, idle talk. But something in Camilla's tone, that edge of fear, stayed with him. As the sun began to lower, the palace settled into its golden hour calm. Michael returned to the barracks, but the conversation replayed in his head like a broken record. He wasn't supposed to hear it. He wasn't supposed to care. But his instincts, the same instincts that had saved diplomats and guarded kings, told him this was more than gossip. This was a confession of unease, and unease inside the royal walls spreads like wildfire. Later that evening, a fellow guard, Corporal Hughes, noticed his silence. "You all right, Mike? You look like you've seen a ghost." Michael just shook his head. "Nothing. Just long day." But as he lay in bed that night, he couldn't sleep. He pictured Princess Charlotte, her wide grin, her hand waving proudly from the carriage window, the pure innocence that seemed untouched by the palace's shadows. He thought of Diana, too, how her warmth had once both healed and haunted the royal image. And now, decades later,
Next morning,
a little girl's
the
charm
palace
seemed
felt
to awaken those
different,
same echoes.
colder.
Could Camilla
Servants
be right
spoke
to
in
worry,
whispers.
or was this
Aides
something
moved
darker,
briskly,
something
and
that
somewhere in the
revealed a
upper
truth the
chambers,
public was
rumors
never meant
began
to hear?
form. Someone no one knew who had mentioned that a guard overheard something sensitive. Within hours, that whisper had reached the royal security office. By nightfall, every guard was questioned. Michael's pulse raced as his name was called. In a quiet room lined with portraits of kings and queens, the commander asked him one question. "Did you hear anything yesterday that concerns Her Majesty or the family?" Michael hesitated. His throat tightened. He could lie, protect his post, his career, or tell the truth and risk everything. He swallowed hard. "I may have overheard a conversation. I didn't intend to, sir." The commander's eyes narrowed. "And what did you hear?" Michael paused, replaying the words carefully in his mind. He chose his truth wisely. Her Majesty expressed concern about the princess's growing attention. Nothing more. The commander leaned back. "You'll forget it, then. It wasn't meant for your ears." Michael nodded. "Yes, sir." But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. That night, as the palace lights dimmed and the castle's stone walls glowed faintly under the moon, a quiet unease rippled through Windsor. Camilla's words had been spoken in private, but now a guard had heard them, and secrets inside royal walls never stay buried for long. As Michael closed his eyes, one thought lingered. What the Queen's fear was not about Charlotte's fame, but something much closer to home. A question that, before long, would draw the entire palace into an emotional storm no one saw coming. Morning light spilled across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace, scattering gold through the corridors like shards of quiet beauty. But behind those gleaming halls, tension had begun to hum, soft, invisible, and unmistakable. Queen Camilla sat alone in her private study. The heavy curtains were drawn, the silence broken only by the ticking of a royal clock. She looked tired, not in the way one feels after a long day, but the kind of weariness that seeps into the soul. In her hands, she held a photo, not of herself or King Charles, but of Princess Charlotte. The little girl's eyes sparkled with the same innocent curiosity Diana once had. Camilla sighed. "She has that look," she whispered, almost to herself. Moments later, her private secretary entered quietly. "Your Majesty, shall I prepare your notes for the charity visit?" Camilla nodded absently. Then, after a pause, she said, "Do you remember the way they spoke about Diana? The crowds, the cheers, the obsession?" The secretary hesitated. "Of course, ma'am. The world adored her." Camilla's gaze darkened slightly. "Yes, and that adoration, it broke Charles. It broke everything." For years, Camilla had fought for acceptance, not just as Charles's wife, but as a woman living under the shadow of a ghost. Every smile she gave in public was carefully measured. Every step choreographed seemed graceful, gentle, deserving. Yet, deep down, she knew some hearts would never forgive her. Now, she feared history might be repeating itself. She watched the way the public lit up when Charlotte appeared. The laughter, the waving, the innocent charm that seemed effortless. Charlotte reminds him of Diana. She had once told Charles. That same light, that same pull. But what she didn't say aloud was what haunted her the most. That kind of light had a way of burning everything around it. Meanwhile, in the palace corridors, the echoes of her words, the ones overheard by the guard, had begun to circulate quietly. One aide whispered to another. "They say the Queen's worried about the young princess, that she's afraid Charlotte will steal the public's heart." Another responded, frowning. "That's absurd. She's a child." And yet, in the royal household, perception is reality. By afternoon, whispers turn into cautious curiosity. Someone mentioned it in passing near Catherine's private staff. By evening, the rumor had reached Princess Catherine herself. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, there was an uneasy quiet between conversations about state visits and garden renovations. Camilla tried to act composed, but her eyes flickered towards Charlotte more than once. The little princess sat beside her mother, giggling at something George had whispered. Catherine noticed, and she knew. A mother always knows when something unspoken lingers in the air. After dinner, when the others had left, Catherine approached Camilla gently. "You seemed preoccupied lately," she said softly. "Is everything all right?" Camilla hesitated, setting down her tea. "I'm fine, dear. Just the usual palace nonsense." Catherine tilted her head. "I heard something today. Something about Charlotte, that you'd expressed concern." Camilla's eyes snapped up. "Who told you that?" Catherine shook her head. "It doesn't matter who, but I'd like to know why." There was no accusation in her tone, just quiet, protective strength. Camilla took a deep breath. "You know how the press can be. They love a story, and they love children who remind them of someone they lost. I only meant she must be protected." Carefully, Catherine softened slightly. "She is, always will be." But then Camilla added, almost in a whisper, "I've seen what happens when the public chooses favorites." It was a moment of raw honesty, the kind that rarely survives in royal walls. Catherine nodded slowly. "And I've seen what happens when families let fear dictate love." Then she smiled, faintly. "Charlotte's light isn't a threat, Camilla. It's her gift." Camilla looked away, her throat tightening. "A gift, yes, but every gift comes with price." Elsewhere in the palace, Sergeant Michael Rowe still couldn't shake his unease. He had done as instructed, said nothing more, kept his head down. But when he saw Princess Charlotte the next day, skipping through the courtyard with her ponytail bouncing in the breeze, he felt something shift inside him. How could a few words, overheard by chance, cause so much quiet chaos? He'd sworn an oath to protect the royal family. But what if the danger wasn't from the outside, but from within? That night, a storm rolled over London, thunder echoing across the castle roofs. Inside, Camilla stood by her window, watching the rain streak the glass. She thought of her younger self, the years spent hiding from headlines, the letters, the hate, the endless comparisons to Diana. The public had painted her as a villain. And even after years of service, she still felt like an outsider at her own table. And now, as she looked at Charlotte, this bright, beloved child, she felt something she didn't expect. Fear mixed with admiration. "She'll be adored," she murmured. "And maybe that's what scares me." In her heart, Camilla wasn't plotting or scheming. She was simply afraid. Afraid that the monarchy's history would repeat itself, that love and attention, once again, might tear the family apart. By morning, the rain had cleared, but the storm inside the palace had only begun. The rumors, the overheard words, and the quiet tension between Camilla and Catherine had started to weave into something far greater, something that would soon reach Prince William himself. And when it did, it would no longer be a matter of whispers, but of loyalty, truth, and protection. Because what began as an overheard conversation was about to turn into a royal reckoning. The corridors of Windsor Castle had a way of swallowing sound, but Sergeant Michael Rowe felt every whisper as if it were pressed against his chest. It wasn't just a memory of what he'd overheard. Camilla's words about Princess Charlotte haunted him like shadows flickering along the stone walls. The palace, normally a place of routine and ceremonial precision, now seemed tense, almost alive with secrets. Michael could sense in the hurried footsteps of aides, the hushed murmurs in the hallways, even in the way Camilla's presence seemed to cast a silent weight wherever she went. He had done his duty, spoken carefully when questioned, revealing only enough to satisfy protocol without betraying trust. But truth has a way of lingering, and so does conscience. It started with small signs, a subtle glance from the commander that lasted a fraction too long, questions from fellow guards that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried a hidden edge. Funny how someone always hears the wrong thing, huh? Michael's stomach twisted. They didn't know what he had heard, or did they? He tried to tell himself to forget it, to push the incident into the shadows where it belonged. Yet every time he saw Princess Charlotte's laughter echoing to the courtyard, or Camilla's concerned gaze from the windows above, the words returned. If Charlotte keeps drawing that kind of attention, someone will have to make sure she's guided tightly before it's too late. What did she mean? Was it merely fear for the child's well-being? Or was there something more deliberate, something darker, that he couldn't yet comprehend? That evening, Michael walked a familiar guard route along the northern terrace, the River Thames glinting under a fading sun. His mind was a storm of what-ifs. He had always believed in absolute loyalty, that truth should remain behind the walls, protected and hidden. But that oath now felt heavy, almost suffocating. Could he remain silent, knowing the words he heard might shape the life of a child? Could he bear the thought of history repeating itself, Charlotte unknowingly caught in its cycle? And yet, to speak up could destroy his career, even his reputation. A choice between duty and conscience. It's never easy, he thought. The dilemma grew sharper the next morning. Michael overheard aides discussing a possible incident regarding Charlotte's public appearances. Rumors suggested that Camilla's concerns had been shared selectively, not as warnings, but as instructions for tighter control over the young princess's schedule. Michael clenched his fists. If he spoke, he risked scandal. If he stayed silent, he risked complicity. It was during this internal conflict that Corporal Hughes approached him in the barracks. "You seemed different lately," Hughes said, his tone casual but probing. "Something bothering you?" Michael hesitated. Then he shook his head. "It's nothing. Just tired, that's all." But Hughes wasn't convinced. "You know, sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easiest." Michael swallowed. He wished he could confide in someone, but who could understand the weight of overhearing the Queen herself? As days passed, the atmosphere inside Windsor grew tense. Guards noticed subtle changes. Extra security during Charlotte's visits, aides whispering with unusual urgency, Camilla appearing more frequently near her. Michael felt trapped. Each encounter with the royal family reminded him of what he knew. Each smile, each wave, each innocent laugh of Charlotte's was a bittersweet reminder of the stakes involved. Could a single guard's conscience really matter in a palace built on centuries of protocol and secrecy? One afternoon, while standing sentinel near the gardens, Michael's thoughts wandered to Princess Charlotte herself. He had seen her from afar, her curls bouncing in the breeze, her eyes bright with mischief. "She doesn't deserve worry," he muttered under his breath. "Not from the world, not from me." The thought struck him. Even if he remained silent, he had a responsibility, not to the palace, not to protocol, but to the child herself. It was a dangerous line to walk, to balance truth and duty, to guard a secret he could never reveal openly. And then came the message, a summons from the commander. In the dimly lit office, Michael faced the weight of authority. "Sergeant Rowe," the commander began, his eyes sharp. "There are concerns that certain conversations have been overheard. We trust your loyalty, but we need assurance." Michael felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment. He could lie completely, protect himself, or hint at what he had heard. "Sir," he said carefully, "I heard a conversation, yes, but I've spoken only what is necessary. My duty is to protect the family and the princess, nothing more." The commander nodded slowly. "See that it stays that way. Discretion is paramount." Michael left the office, the weight of his conscience heavier than ever. He realized then that the palace wasn't just walls and guards. It was a living entity, breathing through whispers, fears, and loyalties. And in its shadow, a single person, even a loyal guard, could carry the burden of truth. That night, as Michael prepared to leave his post, he looked up at the castle towers. Could he truly remain silent and honor his oath? Or was his conscience a stronger force than the centuries of protocol he'd been sworn to uphold? One thing was certain, the palace had changed, and so had he, because in the end, loyalty isn't just about duty. Sometimes it's about courage, and Michael was about to discover just how high the price of that courage could be. The morning sun filtered gently through the palace windows, painting Windsor in gold, but inside, the air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath. Prince William and Princess Catherine had been informed, delicately, carefully, that an overheard conversation had raised concerns. Not scandalous, not dangerous, but enough to unsettle the balance of their family's world. They didn't yet know the full weight of what had been said, only that Camilla's words, though private, had been heard by someone outside the immediate circle. And now loyalty, fear, and truth had all collided in one place. In the nursery, Charlotte played quietly, her tiny fingers tracing patterns in a wooden train set. She hummed a tune, unaware that she had become the center of whispered worries and silent calculations. William knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her face. "Charlotte, sweetheart, are you ready for story?" he asked. She smiled brightly, her innocence radiating like sunlight. "Yes, Daddy." Catherine watched, her heart aching with both love and unease. She knew that this innocence, this untainted joy, was the very thing the palace seemed to fear. It was a paradox. The child's charm brought joy to the public, yet stirred caution in the adults tasked with guiding her. Later that afternoon, Michael Rowe, the guard who had overheard everything, was quietly summoned to a private meeting with the family. It was unusual for a guard to be invited so directly. He entered, tense but respectful, expecting a reprimand or a test of his loyalty. Instead, he was met with calm, deliberate eyes. William spoke first. "Michael, thank you for coming. I understand you've seen something that wasn't meant for your ears." Michael bowed slightly. "Yes, Your Highness. I've kept it as instructed. My duty is to protect the princess." Catherine added softly, "We understand the burden that comes with knowing more than you should, and we are grateful for your honesty." The room was quiet. Michael felt a tension in the air, not fear, but understanding. He had expected blame. Instead, he was met with acknowledgement. The conversation turned to Charlotte herself. "She's only 7, Catherine said, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "She doesn't deserve this weight. Not from the palace. Not from anyone." William nodded. "We have a choice. We can let fear dictate our actions, or we can trust in her innocence." It was a revelation to Michael, a lesson in courage that had nothing to do with protocol. The palace could be a place of power and secrecy, but here, in this room, it became a place of protection and love. "Charlotte," William said, smiling down at her, "you're going to grow up surrounded by people who love you. No one else's fear can change that." The little girl beamed, unaware of the weight of the words, yet somehow feeling their truth. Camilla, who had been distant at first, entered the room quietly. She stood behind William and Catherine, watching Charlotte's innocent joy. For a long moment, the Queen seemed to reconsider everything she had feared. "Perhaps I've been too cautious," she murmured, almost to herself. Her light, it doesn't have to burn anyone. It can illuminate instead. It was a rare admission, a recognition that fear, even for those we care about, can cloud judgment. Michael, standing respectfully to the side, realized that this moment, this fragile, emotional turning point, was what true loyalty meant. Not blind obedience, but careful courage in service of something larger than oneself. Protection, honesty, and love. That evening, as Charlotte slept, William and Catherine reflected quietly in the nursery. "She really is remarkable," Catherine said. "Yes," William agreed, "but it's not just Charlotte. It's the way we respond, the way we guide her, protect her. That's what matters." Michael, meanwhile, returned to his post with a quiet sense of relief. The storm of tension that had haunted him was easing. He understood now that overhearing the conversation was not a curse, but responsibility, one he had honored. The palace, for all its centuries of tradition and ceremony, had been reminded of something essential. Even within walls of protocol and history, love and integrity can prevail. Camilla had voiced fear. Michael had carried the secret. William and Catherine had chosen trust. And Princess Charlotte, the innocent at the heart of it all, continued to laugh, to play, and to remind everyone of what truly mattered. Sometimes, Michael thought as he looked at the glowing towers of Windsor under the moonlight, the smallest voices, even a child's, can change the course of everything. It was a lesson in courage and empathy and in the quiet power of innocence. And as the palace slept, the storm that had begun in whispers had transformed into something far more powerful. Hope, understanding, and a renewed sense of family.